I'm Kathy. Brian Clutcha is my son. December 26th, 2017 was the last time I heard from him. Brian is kind, very giving, just a really nice person. Brian always liked people. I don't know if it was because he was an only child, but I can remember waking him up for school and telling him if he didn't get up, he would miss school and miss all the other kids there, and that worked.
I'm Nate, and I am Brian's good friend. I met Brian in about 2014. We actually met at a gay bar that I was working at. Brian had a childlike innocence about him that really struck a chord with me. Our personalities just clicked. We became really close really quick. He liked to go on adventures and stuff. One time we got to go to Oklahoma City. It was snowing, and Brian was like, "What are you doing right now? Do you have anywhere to go?" And I was like, "No." And he's like, "We're gonna go sledding." It was my first time ever sledding. That was a lot of fun. Just wee. That's one of my favorite memories of him. I definitely feel blessed that Brian came into my life. I used to have a really bad drinking problem. I was almost at rock bottom. And he was the first person to get it through my head that I might have a drinking problem. And we went and checked out rehab places. He knew that I wanted to quit as much as he wanted me to quit. One time I went down to visit him and he took me to the beach for the first time. And we got to swim around and play in the water, which I'd never got to do before. And he got to meet the sober Nate. It was very special.
Since Brian was little, he's always loved Christmas. When Brian was grown, he told me he'd rather have money for Christmas, so I would, instead of me buying him stuff, so I'd just send him transfer money to his bank account. On December 26th in 2017, he texted me and asked me if I sent him a Christmas present. And so I called him and I said, yeah, I sent on the 24th. It should be in your bank account, if not today, tomorrow. He said, thank you. And he said, I'm in a hurry, Mom. I have to go and I'll call you back later. But I didn't hear back from him.
My name is Andrew Dowler, and I was Brian Clutcha's roommate. I first met Brian around December 15th, 2017. I owned a house, had a room for rent, and a roommate, AJ, said he knew a guy named Brian, needed a place to stay, vouched for him. I said, sure, no problem. When I first met him, he seemed very shy, very soft-spoken. When you see him, you just want to give him a hug. I just can't describe it any other way. You know, he's got the 2 cats. He loves cats. He referred to them as his fur babies. He was a very private person, especially about him being gay. Definitely very low-key. If you saw him on the street, you would not know he was gay. The dynamic between AJ and Brian is very confusing. I have no idea exactly when they met or how long they've known each other, but they both use the term boyfriends at a different time, but AJ was far more guarded with that term. The time that Brian moved in, it was very hectic. I have a full-time job. Brian had his job. I didn't get to see him a lot. So on December 22nd, 2017, 7:47 a.m. I left the house to go on vacation. The last sight I had of Brian was leaving the hallway from my bedroom. His door was wide open. I just remember him lying there. His 2 cats were curled up with him. And that was the last time I saw him.
When I first didn't hear from Brian, I thought, I wonder why my kid is ignoring me. Maybe he's really busy. Brian had told me he had found brand new roommates, but I didn't know where Brian was currently living. I didn't get the address. I knew he was working. Brian loved theme parks. He worked at one in high school, and then recently he worked at one in Orlando. as a bus driver. And also, after he got off work, he would work as an Uber driver for extra money. Sometimes he would call me, like every 3 days, and sometimes it might be 6 months. I just thought he must be busy.
When I came back from my vacation, he wasn't at the house. I'm just assuming I'm gonna see him at some point or whatnot. But a couple days did go by, and Brian's not there. As time goes on, I realize, hey, wait a second, his cats are still there. So, where's Brian? I was very worried for him. I did not have his phone number.
When I didn't hear from Brian, I would call him at different times of the day. One time I woke up in the middle of the night and tried to call him. Thought maybe he might wake up and pick up the phone. I texted him, I emailed him, and no response. I started to call his work probably, I would say 8 to 10 times and talk to their security office. They told me they would get back with me. No one ever got back with me. So finally I went up to his work and I didn't really get a response either. I started driving around in the state of Florida looking for my son, and I couldn't find him. It was really hard. And then I got really worried. It was just a horrible panic mode. I knew something horrible had happened to Brian.
Me and him hadn't talked for about a month, and I was nervous because he wasn't answering the phone or anything like that. I thought he had gotten tangled up with a boy. And then finally his mom contacted me and said Brian's been missing. Instantly I hung up and tried calling Brian again, and it just went straight to voicemail. That really scared me.
In March of 2018, I made a local police report. They told me to take it to Tampa Police, but Tampa Police told me it really wasn't their responsibility because he lived in Polk County. It was really frustrating to me that nobody would investigate because they told me it was somebody else's jurisdiction and it wasn't their responsibility. The Tampa Police detective that I talked to told me he would try to call someone he knew at the state police.
My name is Chuck Masucci. I'm with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. I was assigned as the lead agent in the disappearance of Brian Kletcher. FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, is a state police agency. We are the investigative branch of the state police.
In March of 2018, Chuck came to my house.
I want her to meet me face to face. I want her to know who's going to be responsible for moving this investigation forward.
I had many questions going through my head.
She wanted to know what happened to Brian and where is he. The cats being left behind was suspicious. His mother felt that Brian would not have left his cats behind if he had left on his own volition. I could see her concern. Brian's mother loved her son. When a parent loses a child, it's one of the worst tragedies we can experience. But Brian's mother in particular is in a position where she's lost a child and doesn't have a resolution. It's heartbreaking.
I remember he did tell me the hardest part is just not knowing where your child is.
I recognized that this was going to be a difficult investigation from the get-go. Brian's disappearance was problematic because we didn't have a good handle on where specifically he went missing from.
I made a flyer to let people know that my son was missing and if they have any information to contact the police. The next thing I do is set up a Facebook page and message some of his friends and let them know that Brian is missing and have they had contact with him. And many people had contacted me back and said no.
My name is Ryan Williams Gent, and I'm the managing editor for Watermark. Watermark is the LGBTQ news source for Central Florida and Tampa Bay. We basically just highlight LGBTQ voices throughout the area. Brian's disappearance did not seem to get much traction in the press. So we wanted to cover the story. I really wanted to help spread the word.
I went on a lot of the dating apps, and I just started sending the missing poster to people. Most places, the gay community is really close-knit, and so I was really hoping that somebody would have seen that and known what happened, but I hadn't got any leads. That really frustrated me. I felt like there wasn't enough that I could do.
Finally, in April of 2018, I get a lead that helped in this investigation. I learned that on the 27th of December, the last withdrawal was made from Brian's credit union account. To verify that it was Brian that made the withdrawal, I contact the bank and they provide me still pictures from a surveillance video. It shows Brian driving his Jeep and it shows Brian walking into the bank.
I saw the video when he was in the bank. It just looked like he was normally there to do a withdrawal. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary about it.
I learned that $200 had been withdrawn, and he did not appear to be under any duress as he walked in and exited the bank.
It was $200 I had sent him for Christmas that he took out of the bank. That is the last time that he has been recorded or seen. I just thought, this doesn't make sense. Where's my son?
I last see Brian before Christmas, and then he just falls off the face of the earth. There's just this malaise of not knowing. And then AJ leaves weeks later. I didn't see Brian when I returned home from Christmas, but I did see in my inbox, he had written me this email. He was expressing his hesitancy about if he's gonna be able to stay there. With the whole dynamic, I can understand why he would not want to stay here. So him leaving kind of fit in partially with the story of like, maybe he did just disappear.
The email just was weird. It just didn't sound like Brian. Brian had masters in reading and literature. The email, it just wasn't the style of his writing. It just wasn't Brian's words. It wasn't his spelling. I do believe the email wasn't sent by Brian.
So my starting point was Brian's house. I would generalize the neighborhood as being working class. The neighbors seem to watch for vehicles that shouldn't be there. It is a safe neighborhood if you belong there and you're known to be there.
From my reporting on Brian's disappearance, I was able to determine that Brian had moved into a residence in Lakeland 12 days prior to his going missing, which I understood to be sort of a communal residence. That is not uncommon for members of the LGBTQ community. Florida is increasingly expensive. We're also a state where many folks from many states come to live, sometimes without any family because that family doesn't accept them in the community or because they just wanted to change. I myself am from Ohio, and when I moved here, I was in a communal situation with friends.
I identify Andrew Doller as the owner of the home through property records. I find him at his place of employment.
When I first hear, hey, can you come down to HR? The police are here to see you. I immediately know in my head, it's something with Brian Lt.Joe. I'm either gonna find out he died somewhere, I'm gonna get the news, oh my gosh, and I'm like, my heart's beating of like, oh, what happened? I've come to find out they don't know where he is.
I'll say this about Andrew. He was cooperative and I would say forthright from the beginning of our conversation. After talking to Andrew, I learned that Brian was introverted, spent a majority of his time in his room. I wanted to understand the timeline of when Brian moved into the house. I learned that when Brian moved in, the relationship that he had had with AJ has ended, at least in AJ's mind. To complicate Brian's situation, AJ has moved on to a new relationship.
AJ tells me he has a second friend, Dylan. It's an emergency, needs a place to stay. And seeing how great Brian was working out, I agreed. But come to find out, AJ likes Dylan like a lot. So you've got Brian in one room, you've got Dylan in another, and AJ in another room. And since he likes Dylan, there's a very uncomfortable, very palatable amount of tension in the house between AJ's attention going to Dylan, Brian getting jealous. So you had this very crazy triangle of drama that erupted that I never saw coming, and throwing flame on a gasoline, it was pretty bad.
I learned that Brian is very distressed and very upset about the breakup with AJ and AJ's current relationship with the other roommate.
In my opinion, AJ is somebody that took advantage of Brian and treated him badly. I know that I received several phone calls from Brian upset. He would tell me AJ did this, AJ did that.
Brian's emoting and brooding and pacing and worrying, and I'm like, why? Why are you doing this to yourself? You're such a good guy. I could see the spiral. I could see, oh, this is not good. There was one time, I remember he laid against the wall of one room, and it was almost like he'd have his ear to the wall so he could try to listen to what's going on in Dylan's room. I just remember his face was so sad. I was very worried for him.
Suicide did cross my mind as he had a suicide attempt at my house. I found him in his closet. He had taken a lot of pills. I had to be the one to call 911, and we got him to the hospital. It was really scary.
Suicide, it certainly is a concern for members of the LGBTQ community. Many members do struggle with mental health because of a lack of acceptance. The Trevor Project, which is the nation's largest LGBTQ-focused organization that deals with suicide, they found in one of their larger studies that 45% of LGBTQ youth had considered suicide in that last year.
But in Brian's case, I don't feel that he would do it in a way where we wouldn't find his body. So the fact that we haven't found one leads me to think that it wasn't suicide.
It's not something that would be ruled out necessarily, but our reporting didn't find any indication that that would have been the case with Brian.
My first gut reaction was that he just ran away, that he needed to just be by himself, but he would never have left his cats. His cats were his prized possession. And so when I found out that he didn't take his cats, that really scared me.
During my interviews, I'm hearing a variety of explanations as to what happened to Brian. Specifically, AJ had told one friend that Brian went out for a walk and never returned. He told another roommate that Brian returned to his family. He told a second roommate that Brian went to a campground that caters to the gay community.
Sawmill Campground, it's definitely an LGBTQ hotspot in Florida. They have cabins, people bring their RVs, there are multiple bars, so a lot of LGBTQ people will visit to stay for a day, a week, longer.
I was well aware of Brian's interest in going to Sawmill because they had huge parties that are epic. He was looking forward to letting loose. And I was both a little happy and a little worried at the same time about that.
I follow up on all of the leads as possibilities. We send agents out to the campground. We canvass the neighborhood and the area beyond the neighborhood looking for video and or witnesses that could have seen him. None of that panned out. None of those stories were provably true.
So sometime in late January, I feel concerned, so I want to email Brian. It's my only means of communication with him. But he's not responding to his emails. And I'm like, where is Brian? To complicate matters, AJ appears to be renting out Brian's car to other people. I'm seeing people come to the house, the keys being handed over, money handed over, and that is unacceptable no matter how you slice it. And then I asked AJ, you must know something, what's going on? Have you talked to him? Has he responded to you? He's not responding to me. He's like, man, he hasn't responded. Kind of a little cold, he goes, but I know not to worry. He does this all the time. He disappears. He just seems so just detached. Like, oh, it's all cool. I'm getting very frustrated. There's a point where I shove AJ against the wall. And I'm like, where is Brian? There's a moment I could see he looked at me with his eyes, and I was instantly scared. I just didn't see that side of him before, so that got all the bells and whistles going. Very shortly after January 15th of 2018, AJ has a friend come pick him up, and I haven't seen him since.
On April 4th, Andrew's very cooperative with me, and he agrees to give me consent to search his home. The house is a relatively small single-family home with 3 bedrooms. Andrew directs me to the room where Brian was staying in. And when I go to the door, my first observation is there is no door. It's been kicked in and a sheet is hanging over it. If a door gets kicked in or removed, you can suppose potential violence. When I look past the curtain, there is furniture, clothing, debris just piled up in there. I was shocked at how poorly maintained the room was. I used this chemical called Blue Star, and the Blue Star shows multiple locations where there was potentially blood. There was at least 7, if not 10, locations within the room that someone had a bloodshed. Polk County Crime Lab and myself gathered the DNA by using swabs. FDLE took possession of this swab evidence and turned it over to the FDLE Crime Lab for analysis. I was a little surprised and disheartened at the results. I learned that Brian was not the only person that had lived in that room in the weeks and months prior to his disappearance. Andrew allowed multiple individuals to stay in that room, some permanently, some very temporarily, a night or two. Based on the amount of people that stayed there, based on the activities that occurred, our swabs picked up 3 to 5 contributors, and those are not able to be analyzed. A profile cannot be created. And with that many biological contributors, the data was undeterminable. Next, we checked the parks, vacant land around his house. In the event Brian wandered off and something happened to him, we started by searching the local waters around Brian's home. We sent the boats out and we checked the shorelines by foot. We began to look at parks and open fields. None of the searches that we did revealed Brian's location or provided us any other further leads into his whereabouts.
To our knowledge, FDLE was able to extensively search areas where Brian may have been. But They were unsuccessful, and the search for Brian continues.
At this point, I want to find out as much as I can about AJ and conduct the first interview to allow AJ to give me an accounting of his relationship with Brian.
I was curious on who this AJ was and what was he doing with my son's vehicle and why was he lending it to people. It is my opinion AJ knows where Brian is at. I had this media page set up by Lost and Missing, a nonprofit that helps families and gives them advice for looking for missing family members or loved ones. And I used it to contact all of Brian's friends on his social media pages because I didn't know all of his friends. I did get some tips back from people. Brian's coworker had sent me a picture of AJ. I put his picture on the flyer, and this is the picture that she had sent me.
From the very beginning, AJ was on our radar. We weren't able to verify much when it came to AJ. I do know that there was somewhat of a criminal history. I do know that there were implications via social media that he was involved with Brian's disappearance, but we weren't able to verify much information. Certainly, from our reporting, there wasn't much to go on there.
I had a difficult time locating AJ. He doesn't have any vehicles registered in his name. He doesn't have any home addresses of record. He doesn't have any work employment. So I had to rely on witnesses from this case coming forward and identifying where he may be living. I also had to track down some of his relatives who may have been putting him up. Locating AJ has become, at this stage, my highest priority.
Brian Kletcha was last seen December 27, 2017. If you have any information, please contact Crime Stoppers of Tampa Bay at 1-800-873-8477.
My first contact with AJ doesn't occur until the end of June. I encountered AJ in the city of Tampa. AJ invites me into his home. He's very personable. He's very soft-spoken. I believe that AJ had a lot of casual relationships with different men in the gay community. I wouldn't identify him as a significant drug dealer, but I believe that he did dabble or peddle in it.
Drugs were always at the house at that time. AJ was the supplier. He made it very clear when he was going to pick stuff up, when he was delivering.
There are many folks in the LGBTQ community who do struggle with addiction, who do struggle with drug use. For years and years and years, the only place that many members of the LGBTQ community could be themselves were in bars, in nightclubs, places where drug use, alcohol use may be more prevalent. And that's certainly not to say that all members of the LGBTQ community are doing that, but it can be an issue.
I know that Brian was involved with people that were doing drugs, but I don't want people thinking that he was on drugs. He was very adamant about not liking drugs, and he hated addiction. That's one of the reasons I was shocked to find out he was putting up with somebody who was on drugs. But I think he was trying to fix them.
The priority of this interview with AJ is to allow AJ to give me an accounting of his relationship with Brian and the actions and activities of Brian around Christmas 2017. AJ describes his relationship with Brian as unbalanced. Specifically, Brian wanted a monogamous, committed relationship, and AJ was not comfortable with that. And that was the conflict between them. AJ told me that on a specific morning, right after December 27th, that the two of them had been arguing, and the two of them had been the only two at home, and that Brian left on his own volition and that was the last time he saw Brian alive.
In my opinion, AJ, he was not treating Brian right. Brian would tell me that AJ had taken money out of his wallet and stuff, and we wouldn't really understand it because Brian is the type of person, if you just ask him for money, he would give it to you. What really made it hit home is when I found out about AJ giving away Brian's car. That scared me when I found that out.
My understanding is that AJ was found with some of Brian's belongings. It certainly raises a lot of questions. There's a lot of social media chatter about AJ, but I was never able to verify what those sources were. And there was really nothing that we could securely report on.
During my interview with AJ, when I went to discuss him taking possession of Brian's property, AJ stated Brian would want him to use those things. Their relationship allowed for that. There was no need for overt confirmation, authorization. It was just an understood between them. But he never makes any admissions that he committed theft or that he had anything to do with the disappearance of Brian. But I felt like there were certain situations in this case that I felt were untruthful. I never call a person a liar until I catch him in a lie. I did confront AJ with those points. The specification I prefer not to talk about at this point because we're dealing with an open investigation. But I can say this, that AJ did not put my mind to rest. It adds to more suspicion as to his behavior. But until Brian is located, alive or dead, I cannot eliminate the possibility of him being out there on his own volition. So I don't want to throw too much accusation or dispersion until I rule that out. How do you rule out the fact that he's out there alive and well? You find the body.
So after Brian had been missing for around a year, the reward went up. So it went from $5,000 to $10,000.
If anyone has any information about what happened, you're asked to call Crime Stoppers of Tampa Bay. They are offering that $10,000 reward.
Around April of 2019, I started receiving a series of tips that all seemed unconnected. The first calls that came in to FDLE, individuals wanted to remain anonymous. Then I started receiving the formal Crime Stopper tips. The tips indicated that Brian had been killed and/or Brian was buried under concrete. I probably conducted 12 to 15 interviews related to these tips, and it led me to 2 searches of 2 different properties using cadaver dogs. Cadaver dogs are trained to pick up on the scent of human enzymes or human proteins. They are an effective tool for law enforcement when you believe a body has been dumped and or buried. After completing the search, we came up with absolutely nothing. It's frustrating. None of the leads, none of the tips I've received have really come to any fruition.
I would repost on Facebook explaining, hey, help us out here. The amount of rumors I was drowning in false information because people were popping off about things that they clearly didn't know anything about. I'm like, those types of things are interfering with the real investigation. Let's get back to where's Brian Kletcha?
As recently as September of 2021, we were notified by the Volusia County that they were looking at some unidentified remains. FDLE has a flag out on Brian. Anytime a body is located or recovered in the state of Florida or the United States for that matter, we receive a notification that the body was recovered and we look for similar details.
So Agent Masucci tells me a body's been discovered. It matches Brian's description. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I am shocked. In my heart, I felt like, oh, they found Brian. Sometime in the middle of 2021, the police send me a confidential file at the time that a body's been discovered in a park. It matches basically Brian's description. Although the body was badly decomposed, the basic dimensions of the height, it was male, possibly Caucasian, they all seem to match. And also the time frame of when the body was discovered matches a window of when he went missing. DNA testing takes a long time, apparently. So they asked if I could identify the clothing. So Agent Masucci sends me pictures of clothing, and the clothes were the same brand that Brian was known to have in his closet. So in my heart, I felt like, oh, they found Brian.
Probably over the last 4 years, I've spent thousands of hours, doing research and looking for Brian online or information. I was very frustrated. I was very angry. Where's my kid?
It's hard because it seems like in Florida there's always bodies being found. And you don't want to get your hopes up because you don't want to believe that he's gone. But on the same point, you want closure.
Once you get to this point of an investigation, you're almost in a waiting position. You're waiting for things to come to you. And I will say this, that Brian's mother has gone above and beyond to keep this case in the media, specifically social media. She's done a lot.
My hope is that if I continue to send out these flyers, it will get somebody's reaction. They will remember Brian's face, maybe see him, call the police, and he will be found.
So Brian has been missing for 5 years almost. Brian's story may not have gotten a lot of coverage for a number of reasons. It could have been that he was a member of the LGBTQ community. It could have been his socioeconomic status. I think that knowledge is power. It's why I do what I do. It is always better to have more eyes and more ears on every story. It helps lead to answers, and answers can bring closure.
Myself and FDLE are almost 5 years into this investigation. It's been difficult, it's been frustrating, but not nearly as difficult, frustrating, and painful as it has been for Brian's mother. She doesn't have a resolution, doesn't have, I don't really like the word, but let's use the word closure. If Brian is out there, we would encourage him to come in. If someone is aware of Brian's presence, we would encourage them to come forward. If something bad happened to Brian, suicide or homicide, we would encourage anybody with knowledge to close the investigation, to bring some closure to the mother. Just do the right thing.
It's just been difficult. When you're your own kid, when you're trying to, you just think, how could he not be here? I do believe that some kind of harm came to him, even though I wish and I pray and I hope that it didn't, that I am so wrong. My opinion is AJ knows what happened to my son.
About a year ago, I learned that AJ had moved to Puerto Rico. It infuriates me that AJ is just living scot-free right now in Puerto Rico. I feel that he knows something and that he needs to be brought to justice. Even if he didn't do anything to Brian, I feel like he knows where Brian is. I'm still holding out hope. I don't want to grieve yet. I want to just hope that he ran away, because I don't want to admit that anything worse could have happened. It's an emotional roller coaster every time you hear anything like that.
I do hold out hope that Brian is somewhere. and safe and healthy and happy. But it's hope. It isn't based on evidence.
I definitely feel like we're at a dead end.
It began with a sound no one could quite explain. A single car door slamming shut in the frozen dark, sharp as a gunshot against the stillness of a Minnesota winter night. January 2000. The kind of cold that stiffens breath in your lungs and turns footsteps brittle. The kind of cold that preserves things. By morning, the snow along County Road 17 lay smooth and untouched, a white sheet pulled tight across farmland and scattered pines. Except for one disturbance. Tire tracks cutting off the shoulder. A patch of churned slush. And 50 yards beyond that, half hidden near a drainage ditch, a sedan idling silently, engine dead, driver's door hanging open like a question left mid-sentence. Inside, the keys were still in the ignition. The radio was on. But the driver was gone. Her name was Laura Kessler. 26. Elementary school teacher. Engaged to be married in June. The kind of woman neighbors described in soft, certain tones, reliable, warm, steady. She had left her parents' house at 9:12 p.m., telling them she wanted to beat the incoming snow. She never made it home. By noon the sheriff's department had sealed off the road. Yellow tape snapped in the wind. Deputies walked shoulder to shoulder, eyes scanning the ground for footprints, fibers, anything that didn't belong. But the cold was merciless. Wind erased what snow might have recorded. The ditch yielded nothing but ice. No blood. No sign of struggle. No drag marks. Just that open door and a silence that felt staged. Cold case. The phrase would come later. At first, it was urgency. Search dogs were brought in from Duluth. Helicopters swept low across the farmland, blades beating down waves of powder. Volunteers formed lines, boots crunching in unison. They searched barns, culverts, abandoned sheds. They called her name into woods that swallowed sound whole. Nothing answered. Her purse was on the passenger seat. Wallet inside. Credit cards untouched. Her cell phone, a silver flip model, lay on the floorboard. The last call made at 9:26 p.m. To her fiancé, Mark Halvorsen. Duration, 23 seconds. Mark told police she sounded distracted. Windy. Like she was outside the car. She had said, "There's someone here," and then the line cut. Someone here. 3 words that detonated across a quiet county. By the second day, news vans lined the highway. Reporters stood bundled in thick coats, voices solemn against the white backdrop. Minnesota woman vanishes without a trace. Young teacher missing in winter mystery. The community watched, stunned. Doors locked earlier. Porch lights left burning through the night. Investigators focused first on the obvious. Mechanical failure. Maybe she'd pulled over for help. But the car showed no sign of trouble. Full tank of gas. No flat tires. No engine malfunction. It had been deliberately parked. Then came the interviews. Mark was questioned for 6 hours straight. His alibi checked and rechecked. He had been at his apartment in Mankato, 30 miles away, speaking to a co-worker on a landline at 9:30 p.m. Phone records confirmed it. His grief looked raw, unfiltered. Detectives saw no cracks. Laura's co-workers described no enemies. No strange behavior. No secret fears. But one parent mentioned something odd. A dark pickup truck parked outside the school twice that week, engine running, driver unseen. Police tracked down every registered dark pickup in a 20-mile radius. Dozens. Interviews conducted. Alibis logged. Nothing stuck. Days turned into weeks. The snow melted, revealing brown grass and broken corn stalks, but no trace of Laura Kessler. Spring thaw exposed debris caught in ditches, but no clothing, no jewelry, no body. Then, in April, a break, or what looked like one. A farmer repairing fencing nearly 10 miles from County Road 17 found a scarf tangled in barbed wire. Red wool. Laura had worn a red scarf the night she disappeared. The discovery electrified the investigation. Forensics rushed in. Photos taken. Fibers bagged. It wasn't hers. The scarf belonged to a college student from St. Cloud, who had lost it months earlier. Another dead end. Rumors spread faster than facts. A drifter passing through town. A disgruntled former student's parent. A secret lover. Each theory burned bright, then fizzled under scrutiny. Detectives chased tips into neighboring counties, into Wisconsin, even as far as Iowa. They interviewed truckers, checked surveillance footage from gas stations, combed through Laura's bank statements for anomalies. Nothing moved. By the end of 2000, the case file had grown thick, statements, maps, lab reports, but the center remained hollow. No suspect. No motive. No body. And yet the detail that refused to fade was that phone call. There's someone here. Who? A passing motorist. A predator who had staged a breakdown to lure her out. Or someone she knew well enough to approach without fear. In 2003, 3 years after the disappearance, a retired detective named Alan Burke asked to review the file. He had worked abductions in Minneapolis for decades. He believed patterns hide where chaos pretends to rule. Burke zeroed in on the car's position. It hadn't skidded. It hadn't drifted. It was aligned too neatly with the shoulder. As if Laura had intended to stop, not panicked, not forced off the road, but choosing to pull over. Why would she? Cell tower data was primitive in 2000, but Burke requested a reanalysis. The ping from Laura's final call placed her not exactly on County Road 17, but approximately half a mile south. Margin of error wide, but unsettling. Was the car moved? Forensics had processed the vehicle thoroughly, but Burke asked for a second look using newer techniques. In 2004, luminol testing revealed faint traces on the inside of the driver's door. Not blood, the lab ruled that out, but an unidentified organic compound. Contamination possible. Meaning unclear. The media revived the story. Minnesota cold case reopens. The community's old fear stirred again. Then came the witness who changed everything, or so it seemed. In 2005, a truck mechanic named Daniel Price walked into the sheriff's office. He claimed that on the night Laura vanished, he had seen a woman matching her description arguing with a man near a dark pickup at a gas station, just off Highway 60, 15 miles east of where the car was found. He had stayed silent out of fear, he said. The man looked dangerous. Price described the pickup as black, extended cab, rust along the wheel wells. The driver, mid-30s, heavy build, beard. Detectives cross-referenced unsolved assaults in the region. One name surfaced repeatedly, Raymond Cutter, a local with prior charges for aggravated assault and unlawful restraint. Cutter owned a black extended cab pickup in 2000. He was brought in for questioning. Cutter denied ever meeting Laura Kessler. His truck, he said, had been sold in 2001. No records contradicted him. Forensics found no trace of Laura in his home, his current vehicle, his belongings. Price's identification wavered under cross-examination. The gas station had no preserved surveillance footage. The lead unraveled. Another shock. Another collapse. By 2008, the case was officially labeled unsolved. Laura's parents aged visibly under the weight of it. Mark moved out of state, unable to drive past snowbanks without seeing that open car door in his mind. But the file never truly closed. Every few years, technology advanced. DNA databases expanded. Cold case units formed across the country. Minnesota's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension digitized old records. Laura's case was scanned, indexed, archived in new systems that promised fresh eyes. In 2012, a construction crew widening a rural highway unearthed bones. For 2 days the county held its breath. For 2 days reporters gathered again along frozen fields. The remains were determined to be Native American, centuries old. Not Laura. Time did what it always does, it dulled the headlines, but it sharpened the ache. Because somewhere in that stretch of road, in that brief 23-second call, in the space between a slammed door and a silent field, something happened. Something precise. Something deliberate. A woman vanished in less than a minute. No screams reported. No witnesses stepping forward with certainty. Just tire tracks fading into snow. And the question that would not die, if there was someone there, who were they? In Minnesota, winters are long. They bury the land in white, preserve what lies beneath. But they also conceal. They hide secrets under layers that harden and refreeze, year after year. Laura Kessler's name remained on a board inside the sheriff's office, pinned beside a faded photograph, her smiling, unaware of the darkness waiting on a rural road. The case Saturday. It waited. And somewhere, whether in freedom or fear, someone carried the memory of that night, the slam of a door, the crunch of boots on snow, the engine ticking as it cooled, knowing that the cold had kept its silence. For now. The file never gathered dust. It thickened. By 2015, 15 winters had passed over County Road 17, each one laying down another quiet layer over the night Laura Kessler vanished. But inside the Blue Earth County Sheriff's Office, her photograph remained pinned to a corkboard, not out of sentiment, but out of refusal. Cold case, yes. Forgotten, no. Detective Erin Vance inherited the file that spring. She was 38, sharp-eyed, methodical, the kind of investigator who believed time didn't erase truth, it only distorted it. She had grown up in southern Minnesota. She understood how communities closed ranks, how silence could masquerade as grief. Her first move was simple: start over. Not from scratch, from skepticism. She read every statement, every transcript, every lab report. She circled inconsistencies in red. She built a timeline so precise it accounted for minutes, not hours. January 14, 2000. Laura leaves her parents' home at 9:12 p.m. Snow beginning to fall. Light wind. Temperature, 8 degrees. She turns onto County Road 17 at approximately 9:24 p.m. The call to Mark at 9:26. 23 seconds. Disconnected. Car discovered at 7:40 a.m. the next morning by a dairy farmer en route to milking. 8 hours unaccounted for. Vance drove the route herself. Same time of night. Same stretch of road. She pulled over where the sedan had been found. The shoulder was narrow. No street lights. Just open land and distant tree lines. She turned off her headlights and let the dark settle. It was absolute. If someone had approached Laura's car that night, they would have emerged from blackness. No witnesses. No houses within shouting distance. Just wind cutting across flat fields. Back in the office, Vance re-examined the vehicle photos. The driver's door open at a wide angle. No signs of forced entry. No shattered glass. The purse untouched. That detail nagged at her. In opportunistic abductions, panic leaves chaos. But this scene was composed. Controlled. She requested the original evidence be pulled from storage. The car had long since been released to Laura's family, then sold, then scrapped. But swabs, fibers, and photographs remained sealed. Advances in forensic science had transformed cold cases nationwide. Genetic genealogy had begun to crack decades-old mysteries. Vance wondered if Laura's case held something overlooked, a fragment too small to matter in 2000, but potent now. The lab reprocessed swabs from the steering wheel, the door handle, the gear shift. Predictably, Laura's DNA dominated. A partial male profile surfaced from the interior door frame, faint, degraded, incomplete. It hadn't been usable in 2000. Even now, it was a whisper. But it was male. And it wasn't Mark's. The profile was entered into CODIS. No match. Vance didn't flinch. Many offenders had never been arrested. Many profiles didn't exist in databases. She shifted focus back to the timeline. That 23-second call. She listened to the archived recording again, headphones tight against her ears. Static. Wind. Laura's voice, thin and strained. There's someone here. Not fear, exactly. Not yet. More confusion. As if she hadn't expected company. Then a sound in the background. Not a voice. A metallic thud. Hard to isolate. Vance sent the audio to a specialist in Minneapolis. Weeks later, the report returned. The metallic sound could be a truck door closing. Larger, heavier than a sedan's. Dark pickup. Daniel Price's old statement resurfaced in her mind. The mechanic, who claimed to see Laura arguing with a bearded man at a gas station 15 miles east. His credibility had faltered under pressure, but what if he had been partially right? Memory distorts under fear. Locations blur. Faces morph. But core impressions, a truck, a confrontation, can endure. Vance tracked Price down. He now lived in North Dakota, working oil fields. He agreed to speak, wary but cooperative. Time had thinned his hair and thickened his regret. I should have come forward sooner, he said. I just didn't want trouble. Vance showed him updated photo arrays. Faces aged digitally. Including Raymond Cutter. Price studied them longer this time. His jaw tightened. He pointed, not at Cutter, but at another man. Thomas Grady. Grady had been interviewed once in 2000. Briefly. He owned a black pickup then, lived 8 miles from County Road 17, and had no criminal record. His alibi had seemed solid, home alone, watching television. No one had contradicted it. No one had confirmed it either. Vance reopened Grady's file. He had moved to Montana in 2007. Divorced. Worked intermittently in construction. No arrests. No obvious red flags. But there was something subtle in the old interview transcript. When asked if he had been on County Road 17 that night, Grady had responded, "Not that I recall." Not no. Not that I recall. Memory can be a shield. Vance subpoenaed his phone records from 2000, a long shot, given telecom retention limits. Most were gone. But billing logs showed something interesting. A call placed at 9:19 p.m. on January 14 to a payphone near Highway 60. The same highway where Price claimed to see Laura arguing. The payphone no longer existed. The gas station had been demolished in 2009. But the coincidence pulsed. Vance drove to Montana. Grady answered his door calmly. He looked older, heavier, but his eyes flickered when she introduced herself. Minnesota still followed him. He agreed to speak. Denied knowing Laura beyond seeing her around. Denied being on County Road 17 that night. Claimed the payphone call was work-related. Couldn't remember details. Vance asked for a voluntary DNA sample. He refused. Not illegal. Not incriminating. But telling. Back in Minnesota, Vance petitioned for a warrant, citing the partial male profile from Laura's car and the revived witness identification. A judge approved limited collection, discarded DNA. Investigators surveilled Grady for 3 days. He tossed a coffee cup into a public trash bin outside a hardware store. The cup was bagged, sealed, rushed to the lab. The wait stretched weeks. When the call came, it was cautious. The DNA from the coffee cup was consistent with the partial male profile recovered from Laura's car door. Consistent, not absolute. The original sample was degraded. But statistically significant. For the first time in 15 years, the case shifted from mystery to momentum. A warrant was issued. Grady was arrested in Montana and extradited to Minnesota under quiet escort. The news broke only after he was booked. Minnesota 2000 cold case sees arrest. The headline spread like fire through a community that had learned not to hope. Interrogation began in a small, windowless room. Grady maintained composure. Denied everything. Claimed contamination. Claimed coincidence. Said he had once helped Laura change a tire months before her disappearance, an explanation never mentioned in 2000. No record supported it. Vance pressed harder. Presented the DNA link. The phone billing log. Price's identification. Grady's jaw tightened. His answers shortened. But he did not confess. And without a body, without a witness placing him definitively at the abduction site, the case remained fragile. Prosecutors warned of gaps. Defense attorneys would tear apart degraded DNA. Memory-based identification, after 15 years, would crumble under cross-examination. Then another detail surfaced, small, almost invisible in the original file. On the night Laura vanished, a snowplow driver reported seeing a black pickup parked briefly along a service road intersecting County Road 17 around 9:40 p.m. He hadn't considered it suspicious at the time. The report had been logged, then buried under louder leads. The driver was still alive. Still lucid. He described the truck again. Black. Extended cab. Rust along the wheel wells. Grady's 2000 vehicle registration, black extended cab pickup. Minor rust damage noted during a 1999 traffic stop. The circle tightened. Yet Laura's body remained missing. Without it, the charge would have to be kidnapping, possibly murder without remains, a difficult path. Vance returned to County Road 17 one more time, before the grand jury convened. Snow drifted across the fields again, just as it had that night. She stood where the sedan had been found and tried to see it as Laura had. A stranger approaching. A truck door slamming. Wind swallowing sound. 15 years of silence had not erased the violence of that moment. It had only delayed it. In a courtroom soon, the community would hear a name attached to their fear. But one question still echoed louder than the rest. If Thomas Grady had taken Laura Kessler, where had he taken her? And why had no trace surfaced in all these years? The arrest shocked Minnesota. But shock is not the same as closure. Not yet. The arrest detonated across Minnesota like a delayed explosion, the kind that rattles windows long after the blast. Thomas Grady in handcuffs. 15 years of silence interrupted by flashing lights, and a mugshot broadcast on every evening news station. Minnesota 2000 cold case solved, anchors asked, voices balanced between triumph and caution. A question mark hung over everything. Inside the courthouse in Mankato, the air felt charged, brittle. Laura Kessler's parents sat in the front row, fingers intertwined so tightly their knuckles blanched white. Mark Halvorsen returned from out of state, older, grayer, carrying a grief that had never fully unpacked itself. Behind them, townspeople filled the benches, teachers, farmers, former classmates. Faces that had once searched frozen fields now stared at the man accused of ending her life. Grady entered without visible emotion. Dark suit. Shackled wrists. Eyes forward. No glance toward the gallery. If he felt the weight of the room, he didn't show it. The prosecution moved carefully. No dramatic claims. No overreach. They laid out what they had. Partial DNA recovered from the interior driver's door of Laura's abandoned sedan, now matched to Grady through discarded coffee cup evidence. Phone billing logs placing him near Highway 60 minutes before Laura's last call. A witness, Daniel Price, identifying him as the bearded man arguing with a woman matching Laura's description at a gas station that night. A snowplow driver recalling a black extended cab pickup parked near County Road 17 shortly after 9:30 p.m. Individually, each piece was circumstantial. Together, they formed a tightening ring. But there was still no body. No murder weapon. No confession. The defense attacked immediately. The DNA sample from 2000 had been degraded, incomplete. Contamination possible. The payphone call could have been coincidence. Witness memory after 15 years. Unreliable. Suggestible. Tainted by media exposure. And then they introduced an alternative theory. According to Grady's attorney, Laura Kessler had not been abducted. She had left voluntarily. The open car door, the purse left behind, staged. A planned disappearance. Pressure from an upcoming marriage. Debt. A secret relationship. The courtroom murmured. Laura's mother shook her head slowly, tears sliding unchecked. Detective Erin Vance watched Grady's face during the defense's presentation. He remained still. But when the word voluntarily was spoken, something flickered, irritation, perhaps. Not outrage. Not disbelief. Something sharper. The prosecution called their forensic analyst to the stand. She explained how even partial DNA profiles, when matched against a fresh, full sample, could produce statistically significant correlations. The probability of the profile belonging to someone other than Grady was astronomically low. Still, the defense pressed, partial is not complete. Then came the audio specialist. The metallic thud in the background of Laura's final call, consistent with a truck door closing. Larger than a sedan's. The timing matched the window when the snowplow driver reported seeing a pickup parked along the service road. A pattern emerging. But the turning point arrived from an unexpected direction. During pre-trial preparation, prosecutors re-examined property records connected to Grady in 2000. He had rented a small farmhouse outside Lake Crystal that winter. The lease ended abruptly in February 2000, just weeks after Laura disappeared. The landlord had noted in a handwritten margin that Grady left in a hurry. The farmhouse had since been sold twice. Renovated. A new septic system installed in 2003. Detective Vance requested ground-penetrating radar be used on the properties surrounding acreage, a long shot, but necessary. The current owners were hesitant. The thought of excavation in their backyard stirred old fears. But eventually, they agreed. In early autumn 2016, investigators swept the land. Fields golden with harvested corn. Trees shedding leaves in slow spirals. The radar flagged several anomalies, common in rural soil. Old fence posts. Animal burrows. Discarded machinery. And one deeper disturbance near the tree line, approximately 4 feet down. Excavation began at dawn. News helicopters hovered overhead, careful not to intrude but impossible to ignore. The community held its breath again, just as it had in 2000, in 2003, in 2012. Shovels cut into earth that had been undisturbed for 16 years. 3 feet down, nothing but soil. 4 feet, a scrap of fabric surfaced. Red. Weathered but unmistakable. Laura had worn a red scarf that night. The dig intensified. Forensic archaeologists replaced deputies. Brushes, small tools, careful movements. Then bone. Human. The remains were incomplete, scattered within a shallow grave. The body had been wrapped in what appeared to be a tarp, long since decomposed into brittle fragments. Jewelry was recovered, a small silver necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. Laura's mother identified it without hesitation. Dental records confirmed what everyone already felt. Laura Kessler had been there all along. Buried less than 10 miles from where her car was found. The courtroom atmosphere shifted from tension to gravity. This was no longer a missing person case. No longer theory against theory. It was homicide. The medical examiner testified that skeletal trauma indicated blunt force injury to the skull. No evidence of gunshot wounds. The exact cause of death was difficult to determine after 16 years, but homicide was clear. Grady's composure began to fracture. During the presentation of the excavation photos, he stared down at the defense table, jaw working. The prosecution's narrative solidified. Grady encountered Laura that night, possibly staged a roadside situation, or approached under false pretenses. An argument at the gas station. She attempted to leave, called Mark in confusion. Grady followed her onto County Road 17. Confrontation escalated. He forced her into his truck. Her car was left behind, door open in haste. She was taken to the farmhouse and killed, then buried under cover of winter. No witnesses. No screams heard. Just snow swallowing everything. The defense attempted one final strategy, suggesting the burial site could have been used by someone else, at a different time. But soil analysis showed Laura had been interred in winter conditions consistent with January 2000. Grady had been the tenant at the time. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Outside, Minnesota braced for impact. When the verdict was read, guilty of second-degree murder and kidnapping, the courtroom exhaled as one. Laura's father wept openly. Mark closed his eyes, shoulders collapsing inward. 16 years of uncertainty condensed into a single word, guilty. Grady showed little reaction as he was led away. But even as headlines declared, Minnesota 2000 cold case solved, an unease lingered beneath the relief. Because in the weeks following the conviction, letters began arriving at the sheriff's office. Anonymous. Typed. Postmarked from different cities. Each one contained a single line. You got the wrong man. At first, they were dismissed as the work of sympathizers, conspiracy theorists, opportunists chasing attention. But the fourth letter included a detail never released publicly, a description of the tarp used to wrap Laura's body. Blue, industrial grade, with a specific brand marking partially preserved. That detail had been kept confidential. Detective Vance felt the old chill return, colder than any Minnesota winter. If Grady was guilty, who was sending the letters? And if he wasn't alone, that night on County Road 17, who else had been there when the truck door slammed shut in the dark? The case was solved, the headlines said. But something was still moving beneath the surface, restless and unresolved. The fourth letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, folded with mechanical precision, no return address, postmarked from Des Moines. Same font as the others. Same sterile white paper. But this time, beneath the sentence, "You got the wrong man," there was more. Blue polyethylene top. Harbor Max brand. 12 by 16, purchased locally. Detective Erin Vance read the line twice, then a third time. The top detail had never been disclosed. Not to the media. Not during trial. Only investigators, the prosecutor, and the forensic team knew the brand imprint partially recovered from the degraded plastic fibers in the grave. Someone else knew. The letter wasn't rambling. It wasn't emotional. It was clinical. Informational. As if correcting an error in a report. Vance ordered the envelope processed immediately. Gloves. Swabs. Latent prints. The paper itself examined for trace fibers. The stamp tested for DNA. Nothing. No prints. No saliva. The stamp adhesive had been moistened with water, not a tongue. The paper purchased in bulk from a national office supply chain. The printer ink common. Whoever sent it understood forensic countermeasures. The prison phone logs were pulled next. Thomas Grady had made 3 calls in the week before the letter arrived. 1 to his sister in Billings. 1 to his former co-worker in Montana. 1 to a prepaid cell phone number registered under a false name. The prepaid phone had been activated in Iowa. Des Moines. Vance felt the ground shift beneath her assumptions. Grady was re-interviewed inside Stillwater Correctional Facility. He looked thinner now. Harder. The guilty verdict had settled over him like armor. When Vance slid a copy of the letter across the metal table, his eyes flicked over it quickly. "I didn't write that," he said flatly. "I know," Vance replied. Silence stretched between them. "You weren't alone that night, were you?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted to the small, reinforced window. Snow was falling again outside, soft and indifferent. "You think I'd protect someone after what you did to me," he said finally. "After what you did to Laura," Vance corrected. A muscle tightened in his jaw. "I didn't bury her alone," he said quietly. The words didn't sound like a confession. They sounded like resentment. Vance leaned forward. "Who helped you?" Grady exhaled slowly. "Doesn't matter now." "It matters." Another pause. "You already closed the case," he said. "Community got their monster. That's enough." But it wasn't enough. Investigators traced the prepaid phone's activation to a convenience store outside Des Moines. Surveillance footage from the week prior to activation was long gone. Too much time had passed. However, purchase records showed the phone had been bought with cash alongside a Harbor Max Torb, same brand specified in the letter. The top purchase date, January 13, 2000. 1 day before Laura disappeared. The store manager, now retired, couldn't recall the transaction. But archived inventory logs confirmed only 2 Harbor Max 12 by 16 tarps were sold that week. 1 on January 13th. 1 month later. Grady's financial records from 2000 showed no debit or credit purchase at that store. Cash left no trail. But someone had bought that torp. And someone had mailed those letters. The investigation widened beyond Grady for the first time since his arrest. Old interview transcripts were reopened. Names resurfaced. Among them, Eric Daly. Daly had been casually mentioned in a 2000 supplemental report as one of Grady's occasional drinking companions. No criminal history. Worked seasonal construction. Lived in Mankato at the time. Interviewed briefly. Dismissed quickly. Vance reread his original statement. He claimed he was home alone the night Laura vanished. No corroboration. No follow-up. In 2016, Daly lived in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Des Moines was less than 2 hours away. Vance drove south with 2 investigators, the winter sky hanging low and gray over endless interstate. They knocked on Daly's door just after dusk. He opened it cautiously, eyes narrowing at the sight of badges. He had aged heavily. Thick beard streaked with gray. Broad shoulders slumped slightly. Thomas Grady, Vance said. Daly stiffened almost imperceptibly. Haven't spoken to him in years, he replied. Did you help him bury a body in January 2000? The question landed like a hammer. Daly's face drained of color, but he recovered quickly. That's insane. Vance watched his hands. They trembled, barely. Inside the small living room, investigators noted a stack of white printer paper on a desk. A mid-range inkjet printer. Harbormax top folded neatly in a corner near a toolbox. Common items. Innocent, individually. But patterns matter. Daly agreed to answer questions. Denied involvement. Claimed he barely knew Grady. Said he moved to Iowa in 2005 for work opportunities. Couldn't explain why Grady had called a prepaid phone in Iowa shortly before letters began arriving. He consented to a voluntary DNA sample. The lab worked quickly. The partial DNA profile recovered from Laura's car door, previously matched statistically to Grady, was reanalyzed alongside Daly's sample. The results stunned everyone. The degraded profile was not a single contributor. It was a mixture. 2 male contributors. 1 consistent with Grady. 1 consistent with Daly. The probability of random inclusion was negligible. Suddenly, Grady's quiet statement in prison carried new weight. I didn't bury her alone. An arrest warrant was issued within 48 hours. Daly was taken into custody without incident. As he was led from his house, neighbors watched from behind curtains, confusion etched across their faces. Cedar Rapids had no idea it had been harboring a shadow from Minnesota's most haunting cold case. During interrogation, Daly held firm at first. Denials. Claims of contamination. Accusations of investigative overreach. Then Vance placed a photograph on the table, the excavation site. The red scarf. The shallow grave beneath winter soil. You were there, she said quietly. 16 years ago. You helped dig. His breathing changed. Subtle. Faster. We have your DNA in her car, Vance continued. You followed her. You cornered her. And you thought snow would protect you. Daly stared at the photograph longer than necessary. She wasn't supposed to die, he whispered. The room froze. Whose idea was it? Vance asked. He closed his eyes. It was just supposed to scare her. The story came out in fragments. Disjointed. Ugly. Grady had seen Laura before. At a hardware store. At the school parking lot. He had mentioned her to Daly, the pretty teacher. Obsession brewed quietly. On January 13th, they bought the torp. A joke at first. A fantasy spoken aloud too many times. On January 14th, they followed her car from town. Grady approached her at the gas station under the pretense of needing directions. She recognized him vaguely. Not enough to fear him. Not yet. They trailed her onto County Road 17. When she pulled over, perhaps confused, perhaps pressured, Grady confronted her. The argument escalated. Daly arrived seconds later in his own vehicle. Laura called Mark mid-chaos. "There's someone here." The metallic thud, Daly's truck door. Grady struck her when she tried to run. Daly insisted it was an accident. A shove. A fall. But the blunt force trauma told another story. They panicked. Wrapped her in the torp purchased the day before. Drove her to the farmhouse. Buried her before dawn. Snow began falling again before sunrise, sealing the earth. 16 years of silence built on that snowfall. The letters, Daly admitted, were sent after Grady's conviction. Guilt festering. Fear that Grady might implicate him. An attempt to muddy the waters. To introduce doubt. To fracture certainty. You got the wrong man. Not entirely wrong. Just incomplete. As Daly was transported back to Minnesota to face charges of aiding and abetting murder, the headlines shifted once more. Second arrest in Minnesota 2000 cold case. The community reeled again, relief colliding with fresh horror. Because the truth was darker than anyone imagined. It hadn't been a lone predator in the night. It had been two men. Two trucks. Two sets of footprints erased by snow. And a plan that began as a joke, hardened into obsession, and ended in a shallow grave beneath frozen Minnesota soil. The case that once seemed solved had reopened, deeper and more disturbing than before. Closure, it turned out, was never simple. Not when the cold had preserved more than just secrets. The second arrest shattered whatever fragile sense of closure the first conviction had created. Minnesota had believed it had faced its monster. Now it was forced to confront something worse. A conspiracy of silence between two ordinary men, who had lived quietly among them. Eric Daly was extradited under heavy security. Cameras caught only a brief glimpse of his face, as he was led into the Blue Earth County Jail, pale, expression locked somewhere between dread and exhaustion. The headlines were louder this time. Not just cold case solved, but two men charged. Abduction plot exposed. Teacher targeted. Inside interrogation rooms and court filings, the narrative grew darker, more deliberate. Daly's initial statement, "She wasn't supposed to die," became the focal point. Prosecutors pressed him for clarity. Was it truly accidental? A shove gone wrong? Or was that a convenient dilution of intent? Under questioning, his story shifted subtly. First, it had been Grady who struck her. Then he admitted he had grabbed her arm. Then he conceded he may have pushed her as she tried to run toward the road. The inconsistencies piled up, each revision eroding credibility. Forensic analysis of Laura's skeletal remains offered limited, but devastating insight. The blunt force trauma to the skull was significant. Not a simple fall. The angle suggested impact from above and slightly behind. A downward strike. One blow. Possibly two. Accident began to look less plausible. Meanwhile, investigators reconstructed the events minute by minute. Gas station surveillance from 2000 had long been erased, but transaction logs from that night showed Laura's debit card purchase, at 9:21 p.m. coffee and gas. A black pickup had also purchased fuel minutes earlier, cash payment, pump 3. The clerk, now elderly, remembered little, but he did recall two men laughing loudly near the coffee station. At the time, nothing remarkable. In hindsight, chilling. Phone billing data placed Daly's cell within range of County Road 17 at 9:28 p.m. Tower triangulation in 2000 was imprecise, but combined with Grady's payphone call minutes earlier, the digital footprints converged. Two vehicles trailing one. Laura had been hunted. The trial for Daly began in early spring 2017. Snow still clung stubbornly to the edges of fields, as if winter itself refused to release its grip on the case. The courtroom atmosphere was heavier this time. Grady's conviction had delivered justice. Daly's prosecution demanded truth. Prosecutors laid out a coordinated act: surveillance, pursuit, confrontation, abduction. They introduced store receipts confirming the Torp purchase on January 13. They displayed the blue Harbormax logo fragments recovered from the burial site. They replayed Laura's final call in open court. The static-filled audio echoed across wooden benches, freezing everyone in place. "There's someone here." The metallic slam followed. No one in the room breathed. Daly stared down at the table. When he took the stand in his own defense, the gamble was enormous. He insisted he had been manipulated by Grady. That Grady had fantasized about teaching her a lesson. That he, Daly, had believed it would end in intimidation, not violence. "I was stupid," he said. "I thought it was talk." Prosecutors didn't let the word linger. "You bought the Torp," they countered. "Thomas asked me to," Daly replied. "You followed her." "I didn't think." "You dug the grave." Silence. The shovel had been found during the excavation, rusted, but preserved in soil. Forensic testing linked soil composition on the blade to the burial site, and to residue found in the bed of Grady's truck when it was impounded years later. Daly's fingerprints were not recoverable after 16 winters. But his DNA in Laura's car placed him at the confrontation. His phone data placed him on the road. His own shifting admissions placed him at the grave. Intent became the battleground. Defense attorneys argued lack of premeditated murder. At most, they claimed, it was felony assault spiraled out of control. Fear-driven concealment. Panic in the dark. But prosecutors reminded jurors of the Torp, purchased the day before. Not duct tape. Not rope found by chance. A 12 by 16 industrial Torp capable of wrapping a body. Purchased in advance. Preparation. The jury deliberated longer than in Grady's trial. 5 days. Snow melted outside the courthouse as temperatures rose, slow drips echoing along gutters. When the verdict came, guilty of second-degree murder and kidnapping, there was no audible reaction from Daly. Only a slow blink. A tightening of the jaw. As if the inevitability had finally landed. Laura's parents held each other again. But this time, their relief was complicated. The truth was fuller. But it was uglier. 2 men had watched her that night. 2 men had followed her into darkness. 2 men had decided her fate. Sentencing hearings exposed one final layer of cruelty. In a recorded jail call months before trial, Daly had told a relative, if she hadn't fought, none of this would have happened. The statement detonated across media coverage. Blame redirected at the victim. The community recoiled. At sentencing, the judge's words were measured but cutting. This was not an accident of circumstance. It was the culmination of predatory intent and deliberate action. Snow may conceal, but it does not absolve. Daly received a sentence nearly as long as Grady's. Decades behind bars. Minnesota law allowed for eventual parole review, but both men would age in confinement. The farmhouse property, once quiet and anonymous, became synonymous with horror. The new owners sold it within a year. No renovation could erase what lay beneath. County Road 17 returned to routine traffic. Farmers drove past the spot where the sedan had once Saturday. New snow fell each winter, indifferent to history. But for those who remembered, the landscape had changed permanently. Laura Kessler was finally laid to rest properly. A service attended by hundreds. Her red scarf, preserved as evidence for years, was returned to her family. It rested atop her casket like a reclaimed fragment of dignity. And yet, even with convictions secured, something lingered. Detective Erin Vance stood again at the roadside 1 year after Daly's sentencing. The case was officially closed. Files archived. Evidence catalogued. Justice delivered. But the night air still carried that echo, a car door slamming in darkness. A voice thin with confusion. There's someone here. Closure, she realized, is not the same as undoing. The cold had preserved the truth long enough for science and persistence to uncover it. But it had also preserved the memory of how quickly ordinary lives can fracture. Laura had driven home on a familiar road. She had believed she was safe in a small Minnesota community where everyone knew everyone. She was wrong. The case that began as a missing person file labeled 2000, Kessler, had evolved into a lesson etched deep into the county's consciousness. Evil does not always announce itself with strangers and shadows. Sometimes it wears familiar faces. Drives familiar roads. Laughs in gas stations under fluorescent lights. Minnesota called it a solved cold case. But for those who listened closely on winter nights, when wind scraped across frozen fields and engines ticked as they cooled, it remained something else. A reminder that beneath the quiet snow, secrets can wait for years, patient, silent, and never truly gone. For most of Minnesota, the case ended with the sentences. 2 convictions. 2 predators locked away. Headlines faded. News vans disappeared. The phrase, Minnesota 2000 cold case solved, hardened into fact. But inside the Blue Earth County Sheriff's Office, Detective Erin Vance kept one thin folder separate from the rest. It was labeled simply, Unresolved Elements. Because even after Grady's confession, by implication, and Daly's fractured admissions, pieces of that January night did not sit cleanly in the timeline. The first problem was the blow. The medical examiner had testified to blunt force trauma delivered from above and slightly behind. 1 strike, possibly 2. Enough force to fracture bone. In court, prosecutors implied Grady had swung first. Daly had echoed that version. But during separate interrogations, Grady had once muttered something that never made it into headlines. She hit her head on the truck. It had sounded defensive. Minimizing. But the fracture pattern suggested a weapon, not a simple collision with metal. No weapon had ever been recovered. The second problem was time. Laura's final call ended at 9:26 p.m. The snowplow driver saw a black pickup near the service road at approximately 9:40 p.m. That left 14 minutes, a sliver of time to confront, assault, incapacitate, transfer her to another vehicle, and leave her car staged. Possible. But tight. Vance revisited the original dispatch logs. Something small surfaced. A call at 9:31 p.m. from a motorist traveling northbound on Highway 60. The caller reported a vehicle stopped awkwardly near the intersection leading toward County Road 17. The dispatcher logged it as a non-urgent road hazard. By the time a deputy drove past, the vehicle was gone. That call had never been connected to Laura's disappearance. Until now. If her sedan had been moved even briefly, repositioned to appear less conspicuous, that would explain the slight discrepancy in cell tower data, placing her half a mile south of where the car was ultimately found. Which raised a question no one had asked in court. Had the crime scene been manipulated more deliberately than anyone realized? Vance requested archived photos be digitally enhanced. Tire impressions in snow had been dismissed as indistinct in 2000. But modern software could isolate tread patterns. The result was unsettling. There were 3 distinct tire patterns near the shoulder that night. Laura's sedan, Grady's black pickup, and a third vehicle, narrower tread, different alignment. Daly had driven a separate truck, according to his testimony. But his vehicle registration in 2000 listed a dark green Ford with wider tires than those captured in the enhanced image. The third tread pattern did not match either man's documented vehicles. At first, it seemed like contamination, perhaps a passerby after the fact. But snowfall records showed steady accumulation, beginning at 10:15 p.m. That meant tire tracks present in morning photos likely predated heavy snow coverage. Someone else had been there before the storm sealed the ground. Vance reopened the interrogation transcripts with fresh eyes. In one exchange, Daly had hesitated when asked who arrived first at County Road 17. Thomas was already there, he had said. Then corrected himself. I mean, we both were. A stumble. Grady, in his own interview, had once snapped, "Ask him about the other car." The line had been dismissed as deflection at the time. Now it pulsed. Who was in the third vehicle? The possibility cracked open something the community did not want to consider, that the attack may not have been spontaneous between 2 men, but coordinated with someone else. Vance tracked down old social connections. In 2000, Grady and Daly occasionally spent evenings at a bar outside Mankato, the Iron Lantern. Closed now. Demolished in 2010. But archived payroll records and bartender interviews identified a small circle of regulars. One name resurfaced quietly, Kevin Lutz. Lutz had owned a silver Chevy S10 pickup in 2000, narrow tires consistent with the third tread pattern. He had been interviewed briefly after Laura disappeared, mostly because he had known Grady socially. He claimed he was home that night, asleep by 9 p.m. No follow-up had been conducted. In 2017, Lutz lived in Fargo, North Dakota. Vance drove north this time, through flat expanses of frozen farmland where horizon blurred into sky. Lutz answered the door cautiously, confusion flickering when Minnesota law enforcement introduced themselves. Thomas and Eric are in prison, Vance said evenly. Lutz swallowed. I heard. You were on County Road 17 the night Laura Kessler disappeared. It wasn't a question. He shook his head too quickly. I wasn't. Vance didn't argue. She simply asked for a voluntary DNA sample. He refused. Pattern repeating. Back in Minnesota, the lab re-examined trace evidence collected from the burial top, microscopic fibers previously categorized as environmental debris. Advanced testing now isolated a single human hair fragment embedded in the degraded plastic folds. The hair lacked a root. No nuclear DNA. But mitochondrial DNA was recoverable. It did not match Laura. It did not match Grady. It did not match Daly. The profile was entered into national databases. Weeks passed. Then a hit. A familial mitochondrial match connected distantly to Kevin Lutz's maternal lineage. Not definitive, but directional. Confronted again, Lutz's composure cracked faster than Daly's had. His alibi unraveled under scrutiny. Phone billing data placed his cell near Highway 60 that night, though tower overlap made precision difficult. When presented with the mitochondrial link and the enhanced tire analysis, he exhaled slowly and whispered, "I didn't touch her." 3 men. 3 vehicles. The story shifted again. According to Lutz's eventual statement, Grady had fantasized openly about Laura in the weeks leading up to January 14. Daly had entertained the talk. Lutz claimed he had dismissed it as drunk bravado. But on the night itself, when Grady called asking him to watch the road, he drove out of curiosity, not intent. He admitted parking briefly near County Road 17, engine running, headlights off. He said he saw Laura's car stopped and Grady standing outside it. He saw Daly's truck arrive moments later. "I thought it was just going to scare her," Lutz repeated, echoing Daly's earlier claim. But he admitted hearing a scream. Short. Cut off. He claimed he panicked and left before the body was transported. Said he never helped dig. Never touched the top. His DNA in the hair fragment could be explained, he argued, by casual contact at Grady's farmhouse days earlier. Possible. But improbable. The prosecution faced a dilemma. Lutz's presence strengthened the narrative of coordinated predation, surveillance, lookout, containment. But without direct evidence placing him in physical contact during the assault, charges would hinge on conspiracy and complicity. The community absorbed the new revelation with visible exhaustion. Each layer uncovered made the crime feel less like a tragic eruption and more like a calculated hunt. 3 men. 1 isolated road. A winter night engineered for silence. Vance revisited the burial site again, standing at the tree line where radar had once flagged disturbed soil. Wind moved through branches with a low, hollow sound. She imagined headlights cutting across snow. Engines idling. Doors opening in sequence. A perimeter. Laura had not simply stumbled into danger. She had been encircled. Whether Lutz ever swung a weapon or touched the top mattered legally. But morally, his presence that night, watching, waiting, hearing, bound him to the crime. As prosecutors prepared potential conspiracy charges, Vance understood something deeper had shifted. The cold case had not simply been about identifying a killer. It had been about uncovering how ordinary men, through shared obsession and mutual reinforcement, could transform fantasy into coordinated violence. Snow had preserved more than a body. It had preserved evidence of collaboration. And as Minnesota processed the possibility of a third participant, the phrase, "case closed," felt increasingly fragile. Because every time investigators believed they had reached the bottom of that frozen grave, another shadow moved just beneath the surface. By the time Kevin Lutz's name reached the media, Minnesota no longer reacted with shock, it reacted with fatigue. The headlines were still sharp, still urgent. Third man linked to 2000 cold case. Was Laura Kessler surrounded? But the tone had shifted. The community was no longer asking how this happened. They were asking how many more layers remained. Inside the prosecutor's office, strategy meetings stretched late into the night. Charging Lutz with conspiracy to commit kidnapping and aiding in felony murder would require proof beyond proximity. Presence alone was not enough. They needed intent. Agreement. Participation. An intent is a slippery thing 16 years after the fact. Detective Erin Vance reassembled the timeline again, this time placing 3 vehicles on the map like chess pieces. Laura's sedan. Grady's black pickup. Daly's dark green Ford. And Lutz's silver S10, positioned near the service road intersection. If Lutz had been watching the road, as he claimed, that suggested prearrangement. Lookout. Containment. The scream he admitted hearing, short, cut off, placed him within auditory distance during the assault. He hadn't called 911. He hadn't driven to the sheriff's office. He had driven home. That silence was participation. Phone records revealed something new when examined collectively rather than individually. Between 8:47 p.m. and 9:15 p.m. on January 14, 2000, there had been a sequence of brief calls between Grady, Daly, and Lutz. Not long conversations. 10 seconds. 15. 20. Enough to coordinate movement. Cell towers overlapped near the hardware store where Laura had been seen earlier that week. The pattern was unmistakable now. Surveillance. Not random encounter. Predatory planning dressed up as spontaneity in court. When confronted with the clustered call data, Lutz's version shifted again. He admitted Grady had asked him earlier that week to keep an eye out for Laura's car after school hours. Claimed he thought it was about flirting. About impressing her. But on January 14, when the calls came in rapid succession, he knew it was something else. "You don't call 3 guys for directions," Vance told him during the third interrogation. Lutz stared at the table. "I didn't think he'd kill her," he said. The word kill landed heavily. No one had used it yet in that session. Prosecutors seized on that slip. Grand jury proceedings began quietly. No cameras. No press allowed inside. Evidence was laid out in clinical order: the top purchase, the cell phone choreography, the enhanced tire analysis, the mitochondrial hair fragment, Lutz's admission of hearing a scream and remaining on scene. The jurors listened to Laura's final call again. "There's someone here." 3 someones, as it turned out. The indictment followed 2 weeks later. Kevin Lutz was charged with conspiracy to commit kidnapping and aiding and abetting second-degree murder. Minnesota braced for trial number 3. But something unexpected happened before the courtroom doors opened. Thomas Grady requested to speak. From prison, through his attorney, he signaled willingness to provide additional testimony in exchange for a sentence review hearing, not reduction, but reclassification affecting parole eligibility decades down the line. The prosecutor hesitated. Deals with convicted murderers are radioactive in public opinion. But the potential of a clearer narrative, one that removed any lingering ambiguity, was compelling. Grady was transported under heavy guard to a secure interview room. He looked different now. Less defiant. More brittle. Time in confinement had worn him down in ways interrogation never could. "You want the whole story?" he asked without preamble. Vance said nothing. She let the silence invite him forward. "It wasn't supposed to be that night," he began. "We'd talked about it before. Just talk. Stupid talk." Eric laughed. Kevin rolled his eyes. I thought if we scared her, she'd finally notice me." The fantasy had grown through repetition. At bars. In trucks. In garages thick with cigarette smoke. Obsession validated by audience. Encouraged by silence. On January 13th, after too many beers, they bought the top as a joke. A prop for a threat they imagined, but hadn't fully committed to. On January 14th, when Grady saw Laura leave her parents' house, impulse overtook restraint. He called Daly first. Then Lutz. "Just come out," he told them. "Let's mess with her." They followed her from town. At the gas station, Grady approached her, asking for directions he didn't need. She was polite. Brief. Uninterested. That dismissal stung deeper than he expected. When she drove off, he felt humiliated. Humiliation can metastasize quickly in the dark. On County Road 17, he flashed his headlights, signaling her to pull over. She hesitated, then slowed. Minnesota politeness. Rural reflex, help someone in need. Daly arrived seconds later. Lutz parked near the intersection, engine idling. She started yelling when she saw Eric, Grady said. That wasn't part of it. She tried to get back into her car. Tried to drive off. Grady grabbed the door. Daly pulled her arm. She broke free briefly and reached for her phone. There's someone here. The words ignited panic. Grady claimed he swung reflexively when she tried to run past him toward the road. His fist connected with her head. She fell hard against the frozen ground. But he insisted the fatal injury came after. She was still moving, he said. She was screaming. Daly shouted at him to shut her up. Lutz remained in his truck, watching headlights approach distantly on Highway 60. Grady picked up a tire iron from the back of his truck. The room went still. I didn't mean, he started, then stopped. The sentence collapsed under its own weight. One downward strike. Silence. Daly helped lift her. Lutz drove off as another car passed on the highway, oblivious to what had just occurred yards away in darkness. They wrapped her in the top. Drove separately to the farmhouse. Dug through soil stiff with frost. She didn't fight after that, Grady said quietly. The confession, recorded and signed, removed any residual ambiguity about accident versus intent. The tire iron had never been recovered. Grady admitted throwing it into the Minnesota River days later. With this testimony, prosecutors' case against Lutz strengthened. Even if he hadn't struck Laura, he had knowingly participated in a coordinated abduction that escalated into murder. He had remained present during the assault. He had fled without reporting it. He had preserved silence for 16 years. At trial, Grady testified via video link from prison. His voice carried no theatrics. Just flat recitation. Lutz watched from the defense table, face drained. The jury heard the full choreography, calls, headlights, vehicles forming a perimeter on a rural road. They saw enhanced tire images overlaid with modern mapping. They heard the metallic thud in Laura's call, and now understood it as Daly's truck door closing seconds before the scream. The defense attempted to portray Lutz as a coward, not a conspirator. Present, yes. Guilty of silence, yes. But not of murder. The prosecution countered with a single line. You cannot form a wall around a victim, and then claim you were just passing through. Deliberations lasted 4 days. When the verdict came, guilty on both counts, the reaction in the courtroom was quieter than in previous trials. Not relief. Not triumph. Exhaustion. 3 men now bound legally and irrevocably to a single winter night in 2000. 3 sets of footprints once erased by snow, now etched permanently into court records. As Lutz was led away, he glanced briefly toward the gallery, not at Laura's family, not at reporters, but toward the exit doors, as if measuring the distance between freedom and consequence one last time. Outside, spring rain fell lightly over Mankato. The snow was long gone. Fields greened. Traffic moved steadily along County Road 17, unaware of the geometry of violence once constructed there. Inside the sheriff's office, Detective Vance finally removed the thin folder labeled Unresolved Elements from her desk. There were no more unidentified tire patterns. No more stray DNA profiles. No more anonymous letters. But as she closed the master file for the final time, one truth settled heavily in the quiet room. Laura Kessler had not encountered a monster that night. She had encountered a collective. A convergence of ego, humiliation, cowardice and complicity, amplified by darkness and sealed by snow. And while Minnesota could now say the case was fully solved, the deeper question lingered long after courtrooms emptied and cameras shut off. How many crimes are born not from a single violent impulse, but from the silent encouragement of others standing nearby? On winter nights, when wind sweeps across open farmland and engines cool with metallic ticks in the dark, that question remains, softer than a scream, but far harder to silence. After the third conviction, Minnesota finally exhaled, but it was not the clean release people expected. It was the kind that comes after holding breath too long. Ragged, uneven, uncertain. 3 men sentenced. 3 narratives stitched together into a single, brutal timeline. Prosecutors called it complete accountability. The governor's office issued a brief statement praising the persistence of law enforcement. National outlets replayed the phrase again, Minnesota 2000 cold case solved. But for Detective Erin Vance, the word solved had begun to feel too polished. Because beneath the legal closure, something else had surfaced during the final weeks of Lutz's trial, something quieter, but more unsettling. It started with a box. During a routine inventory review of evidence stored off-site, a clerk flagged an item that had been logged, but never fully processed. It was catalogued simply as, recovered property, Grady residence, February 2000. The farmhouse had been searched briefly after Laura disappeared, but at the time there had been no probable cause to tear it apart. The warrant was narrow. Officers had seized a handful of items considered routine, tools, a pair of boots, miscellaneous papers. The box had sat untouched for 16 years, because nothing inside it had tested positive for blood or obvious forensic markers during early analysis. Until now. Vance reopened it herself. Inside, old receipts, a flashlight, 2 work gloves, and a disposable camera. The camera had been developed in 2000. The prints were filed. Landscape shots. Garage interiors. A blurry image of Grady holding a beer bottle. But digital enhancement in 2017 revealed something that hadn't been visible through older processing. One photograph, taken at night, showed headlights in the distance and the faint outline of a vehicle parked near trees. The timestamp embedded in the negative placed it at January 12, 2000. 2 nights before Laura disappeared. Vance stared at the image under magnification. Grainy. Dark. But unmistakable. The location matched the tree line behind the farmhouse, the same area where Laura had been buried. Why photograph that spot? Why at night? The next image on the roll was even more disturbing. It showed Grady and Daly standing in the bed of a pickup truck, holding the blue Habermax top between them like a banner. Laughing. The timestamp read January 13, 2000. The day they purchased it. It had been processed as harmless, 2 men joking with hardware supplies. No one in 2000 knew what that top would wrap 24 hours later. Intent sometimes hides in plain sight. The photograph was introduced during post-conviction hearings connected to Lutz's appeal. His defense argued he had not known the top would be used for murder. The image complicated that claim. It showed preoccupation. Celebration. Something rehearsed. But the photograph raised another question. Who took it? The camera belonged to Grady, but the angle suggested someone else held it. Daly. Possibly. Lutz. Or someone unaccounted for. The metadata from the developed negatives was limited, but frame sequencing indicated the photo had been taken from ground level several feet away from the truck. A fourth presence. Investigators revisited bar records, employment rosters, casual acquaintances from that winter. The Iron Lantern had been demolished, but archived payroll revealed a part-time bartender named Melissa Avery, who had testified casually in 2000 about overhearing "stupid guy talk" from Grady and Daly weeks before Laura vanished. Avery had moved to Arizona in 2002. When contacted again, she hesitated before speaking. "They weren't joking," she said quietly over the phone. "Not really." She recalled Grady showing her a top receipt, bragging about having a plan. She assumed it was drunken nonsense. Boys posturing. But she remembered something else. "There was another guy with them one night," she said. "Not Kevin. Someone quieter. Sat in the corner. Didn't say much. Name. She couldn't remember. Description. Mid-20s. Dark hair. Wore a Carhartt jacket with a construction company patch. Vance cross-referenced construction crews operating in Blue Earth County in January 2000. One subcontractor roster included a temporary laborer named Scott Brenner, worked 2 weeks on a roofing project with Grady and Daly. No criminal history. Moved to South Dakota later that year. Brenner had never been interviewed. When located in Rapid City, he seemed genuinely confused by the renewed attention. "I barely knew those guys," he insisted. "I quit after a couple weeks." But when shown the enhanced photograph of Grady and Daly holding the top, Brenner's face tightened. "That was behind Tom's place," he said before he could stop himself. He claimed he had driven out there once after work to pick up a paycheck. Claimed he left quickly. Denied taking any photographs. But phone records from 2000, reconstructed through billing archives, placed his cell near the farmhouse on January 13. The same night the top photo was taken. The possibility formed slowly, dangerously. Had there been a fourth witness to the planning stage? Or worse, a fourth man who encouraged it, but never stood on County Road 17. Conspiracy law draws lines at overt acts. Planning alone, without participation in the crime itself, can be difficult to prosecute after so much time. Still, Vance pursued the thread. Under pressure, Brenner admitted he had been present the night the top was purchased. He insisted he thought it was for roofing work. Claimed he left when conversation turned weird. "What kind of weird?" Vance asked. Like they were talking about grabbing her. Just to scare her. "I thought they were idiots." "Did you try to stop them?" Silence. He hadn't reported it either. Legally, his liability was thin. No proof he joined the January 14 pursuit. No evidence his vehicle was near County Road 17 that night. Morally, the picture was heavier. A culture of shared bravado. Multiple men validating a fantasy until it felt actionable. Even if Brenner had peeled away before execution, he had witnessed escalation. He had done nothing. In the end, prosecutors declined to pursue charges against him due to insufficient evidence of direct involvement. The statute of limitations for lesser conspiracy-related offenses had long expired. But the knowledge settled like frost. Laura's death had not emerged from a vacuum. It had gestated in conversation. In laughter. In rooms where objections could have been raised and weren't. The enhanced photographs were archived as supplemental evidence. Not necessary for convictions already secured, but critical for historical accuracy. The narrative of the case evolved once more. Not just 3 men on a rural road, but a circle of silence surrounding them. As the 20th anniversary of Laura's disappearance approached in 2020, a memorial bench was installed near the edge of County Road 17. Not at the exact spot, too dangerous for visitors, but close enough to face the open fields. Her name etched in steel. Birth date. Death date. And one line beneath. Light outlasts the cold. Detective Vance visited alone one evening in January, wind sharp against her coat. Snow drifted softly across the fields again, just as it had that night 2 decades earlier. 3 men in prison. One more who had watched and walked away. Countless others who had heard fragments of dangerous talk and dismissed it. The cold case was solved in court. But standing there, watching snow settle into tire ruts left by passing cars, Vance understood something final and irreversible. The true horror had never been just the blow from a tire iron. It had been the chain of small permissions leading up to it. The laughter that didn't stop. The warning signs ignored. The engine that kept idling in the dark while a scream cut through winter air and was met with silence. Minnesota would remember Laura Kessler as the victim of a brutal crime solved by persistence and science. But those who knew the full file understood a deeper truth. It wasn't only the cold that preserved the secret for 16 years. It was the willingness of men to stand close to violence and choose not to step away. The rumor didn't begin as a headline. It began as a whisper at the back of a church, as 2 women leaned toward each other beneath stained glass and said his name without meaning to say it out loud. For years, the town had learned how to avoid that name. They had folded it away like a newspaper clipping too painful to read. But now it was back, sliding across kitchen tables, murmured in grocery store aisles, typed into search bars in the dark. The Minnesota 2000 cold case that once felt like a wound sealed by time was splitting open again, not because of a new body or a sudden confession, but because of something colder and more precise. The strand of DNA that did not belong. It had started months earlier inside a state lab in St. Paul, where technicians worked beneath humming fluorescent lights, pulling old evidence from climate-controlled lockers. The boxes were stamped with fading dates, 2000. Evidence sealed in brown paper, yellowed tape curling at the edges. Swabs. Fibers. Fingernail scrapings. Items that had once been catalogued with hope, then archived with resignation. This time, the lab wasn't looking for fingerprints or blood types. They were looking for lineage. Genetic genealogy. A technique that had cracked open cases across the country, cases thought untouchable. The kind of breakthrough that turns ghosts into defendants. The sample they worked with was partial, degraded, but it was there. Male. Unidentified. Found beneath the victim's fingernails. 4 years it had been dismissed as contamination, or irrelevant trace. But when the data was uploaded to a public genealogy database, filtered, cross-referenced, refined, something blinked back from the screen. A cluster of distant cousins. 4th cousins. 3rd cousins once removed. People who had never heard of the victim. People who had no idea their holiday DNA kits might unravel a secret buried 2 decades deep. The investigators built a family tree the way you build a map of a crime scene, slowly, carefully, tracing lines that fork and converge. They studied obituaries, marriage licenses, birth records. They followed surnames through counties and decades. Every branch led closer to a narrow group of men who would have been in their 20s in 2000. Men who had lived within driving distance. Men who had no alibis left to verify, because the people who once vouched for them were dead or gone. And then there was him. He had been interviewed in the early days. Just once. A polite conversation in his kitchen while coffee cooled untouched between them. He had known the victim casually. Everyone did. Small town. High school hallways. Friday night football. He had seemed nervous, yes, but grief makes people strange. The detectives at the time moved on. There were louder suspects. More obvious tempers. He faded back into the town's background noise, another face at the hardware store, another pickup truck at the edge of the parking lot. Now his name was circled in red ink on a whiteboard. They didn't rush. They watched. They pulled his old employment records, mapped his movements the week of the murder, compared his statements from 2000 to the quiet life he had built since. He had married, divorced, remarried. He had children who were nearly the age the victim had been when she died. He coached Little League for a while. He volunteered during flood season. Nothing about him screamed violence. Nothing about him looked like a headline waiting to detonate. But the DNA did not lie. They needed confirmation. Something direct. Something undeniable. So they waited for a cup left behind at a diner, for a cigarette, but crushed into snow, for any item he discarded that carried the genetic code they were already staring at in the lab. The moment came on an ordinary Tuesday, when he attended a community meeting about zoning changes. He drank bottled water. He threw it away. An officer retrieved it from the trash after the room cleared. It felt almost absurd, this quiet theft, this modern sleight of hand that could collapse 25 years of silence. The lab results came back in less than a week. Match. Not partial. Not suggestive. Conclusive. The room where the detectives gathered was silent when the analyst said it. For a second, no one moved. Then chairs scraped the floor. Phones were lifted. A warrant was drafted. Outside, snow fell in soft, indifferent sheets over the town that had learned to live with an unsolved murder as part of its identity. The arrest did not happen at night. It happened in daylight, beneath a sky too bright for secrets. 2 squad cars pulled into his driveway. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. He stepped outside when they knocked, confusion flickering across his face, as if he already knew that confusion was the only safe expression left. They cuffed him without resistance. The headline broke before sunset. Minnesota 2000 cold case solved. Arrest shocks community. The words spread like wildfire through social media feeds and television crawlers. Reporters flooded the street, microphones angled toward anyone willing to speak. We never would have guessed. He seemed so normal. After all these years. The phrase is repeated, interchangeable, hollow. Shock is a script people cling to when reality rewrites itself without warning. Inside the jail, he asked for a lawyer. He said nothing else. The victim's family stood together outside the courthouse the next morning. Cameras caught their faces, older now, lined by time and grief that had calcified into something quieter, but no less heavy. They spoke of relief, of gratitude for science, of a door finally opening. But beneath their words was something more complicated. Because solving a case does not rewind it. It does not return birthdays missed or holidays endured with an empty chair at the table. It does not erase the image of a body discovered in the snow at the edge of town in the winter of 2000. And yet, even with the DNA, even with the arrest, questions pulsed beneath the surface. Why her? Why that night? Why no prior record of violence? Investigators combed through his past again, this time with sharper eyes. There were whispers of a temper, of arguments overheard, of a relationship that may have been more intense than he admitted. But nothing that screamed motive loud enough to drown out the years of silence. He had lived among them. He had attended the same fairs, the same fundraisers for the very family whose daughter he was now accused of killing. The courtroom filled on the day of his first appearance. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of townspeople, who wanted to see the face of the man whose DNA had broken the stalemate. He stood when instructed, eyes fixed forward. The charges were read in a measured voice that did not tremble. Second-degree murder. Premeditation uncertain. Intent debated. The prosecution spoke of evidence preserved and technology advanced. The defense spoke of contamination, of doubt, of a rush to closure. The word alleged hung in the air like a thin shield. Outside, snow melted into gray slush as cameras captured every step. But beneath the headlines and the flashing lights, something else lingered. Because the case had not been just about one victim. In the early days, investigators had wondered if the crime was isolated. There had been other incidents in neighboring counties, other assaults that shared unsettling similarities. Those leads had cooled over time, dismissed as coincidence. Now, with his name thrust back into the light, detectives quietly reopened those files too. If the DNA matched here, what else might it match? The town felt different after the arrest. Not safer. Not exactly. More exposed. As if the illusion that evil always arrives from somewhere else had been stripped away. Parents looked at familiar faces with a new calculation. Old memories resurfaced, conversations replayed in sharper focus. People remembered where they were when the body was found, when the first search parties formed, when hope flickered and then dimmed. Now they were making new memories, the sound of sirens in broad daylight, the image of a neighbor in handcuffs. And still, inside an interrogation room, under the glare of lights far less forgiving than the winter sun, he remained silent. Detectives laid out the evidence piece by piece. The DNA beneath her nails. The timeline gaps. The inconsistencies in his original statement. They spoke calmly, methodically, as if walking him back through a night he had spent years pretending not to remember. He stared at the table. He asked for water. He said he didn't understand how his DNA could be there. He said he had nothing to hide. The words sounded practiced, but fear trembled at the edges. The case that had once been defined by absence was now defined by confrontation. And yet, for every answer the science provided, a new question seemed to rise in its place. Because even when a cold case is declared solved, the past does not release its grip easily. It tightens. It demands context. It demands motive. It demands a story that makes sense of violence that once seemed random and now feels terrifyingly personal. In Minnesota, winter settled in again as the legal process began its slow, grinding march forward. The town that had lived with an unsolved mystery for 25 years now faced a different ordeal, the wait for a verdict, the possibility of a trial that would exhume every detail, every photograph, every fragment of that frozen night in 2000. The headline said solved. But in the quiet after the cameras left, in the long hours before dawn when houses creak and memories sharpen, the question lingered like frost on glass. Was this the end of the story? Or just the beginning of a deeper reckoning no one had been prepared to face? Jury selection began under a sky the color of steel, the courthouse steps dusted with fresh snow that melted into thin rivulets by midday, as if even winter could not decide whether to hold on or let go. Inside, the room hummed with restrained tension. 12 strangers would be asked to look backward 25 years and decide what truth meant in a case resurrected by science, but complicated by memory. Each potential juror carried their own history, their own biases about DNA, about small towns, about the kind of man who coaches Little League and then stands accused of murder decades later. The prosecution watched faces carefully as questions were asked. Did they believe in genetic genealogy? Did they understand secondary transfer? Could they set aside media coverage that had once screamed, "Cold case solved," across television screens? The defense listened just as closely, searching for hesitation, for skepticism, for any hint that doubt could take root and grow. By the time 12 jurors and 2 alternates were sworn in, the courtroom felt sealed, as if the air itself had thickened with expectation. The defendant sat at the defense table, suit pressed, hair trimmed shorter than it had been in years, a deliberate attempt to look less like a headline and more like a man. Across the aisle, the victim's family sat shoulder to shoulder, hands clasped, eyes forward. Between them lay a quarter-century of silence, now about to be translated into exhibits and testimony. Opening statements did not roar, they cut. The prosecutor stood first, voice steady, and painted a timeline in precise strokes. Winter 2000. A young woman leaves a gathering. She never makes it home. Her body is found hours later at the edge of a wooded lot, signs of struggle clear even in the dim morning light. 4 years, no suspect. 4 years, no arrest. Then science advances. DNA preserved beneath her fingernails yields a profile. That profile leads to a family tree. That family tree leads to one man. The man sitting at the defense table. The prosecutor did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He let the weight of the decades do the work. The defense rose slowly, adjusted his glasses, and began with a different emphasis. Yes, a tragedy occurred. Yes, the community suffered. But tragedy does not suspend the requirement of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. DNA proves contact, he said, not murder. It proves proximity, not intent. It does not explain the grainy gas station footage with a shadow in the passenger seat. It does not explain the anonymous call about 2 men arguing with the victim. It does not account for the possibility that investigators, under immense pressure to deliver closure, built a narrative around the most compelling piece of evidence and ignored the rest. The first witnesses were procedural, lab technicians who described chain of custody, analysts who explained how degraded samples are amplified and compared, experts who walked the jury through the science of genetic genealogy. Charts were displayed on screens, family trees branching outward in a web of names and dates. The jurors leaned forward as the analyst explained how distant cousins in public databases can lead investigators to a single individual when enough variables align. It sounded almost clinical, almost inevitable. Then the prosecution introduced the match. A statistical probability, so remote it might, as well have been impossible for anyone else to share the same profile. The numbers hung in the air, cold and precise. The analyst testified that contamination protocols had been followed, that independent verification had confirmed the result. When asked if she had any doubt about the source of the DNA beneath the victim's fingernails, she answered simply, no. The defense cross-examined with equal calm. They asked about transfer rates, about how long DNA can persist under certain conditions, about the possibility of indirect contact. They presented academic studies suggesting that trace evidence can travel in ways laypeople do not intuitively understand. They did not need to disprove the match. They only needed to widen the space around it. Next came the enhanced gas station footage. The courtroom lights dimmed as the video played on a large screen. Grainy at first, then sharpening under digital enhancement, the truck pulled into frame. The timestamp glowed in the corner, 12:17 a.m. The driver's side door remained closed. The passenger side door opened briefly, a dark silhouette shifting before the door shut again. The jurors squinted, some tilting their heads as if a different angle might reveal clarity. The prosecution argued the figure was too indistinct to draw conclusions, that the defendant's own shifting statements about being alone undermined his credibility. The defense argued the opposite, that the presence of an unidentified figure shattered the simplicity of the prosecution's timeline. When the retired detective took the stand, age visible in the tremor of his hands, the room grew even quieter. He described the chaotic early days of the investigation, the search parties, the tips flooding in. Then he spoke of the anonymous call. A male voice claiming the victim had argued with 2 men that night. No names. No details. The tip had been logged informally, he admitted, but not pursued aggressively. There had been too many leads, too little manpower. He had believed it was a distraction. The defense pressed him. Did he document the call thoroughly? No. Did he attempt to trace it? No. Did he consider that dismissing it might have allowed a crucial lead to vanish? He hesitated. In hindsight, he said, perhaps more could have been done. The words landed heavily. In cold cases, hindsight is both weapon and wound. The prosecution countered by emphasizing that anonymous tips, without corroboration, cannot anchor an investigation. They reminded the jury that no evidence had ever surfaced linking a second identifiable suspect to the scene. No alternative DNA profile. No credible witness placing another specific individual with the victim in her final moments. Midway through the trial, the defendant himself made a decision that shifted the atmosphere again. He would testify. Gasps were subtle but present. Defendants are not required to take the stand. It is a risk. But he insisted, according to his attorney, that he wanted the jury to hear from him directly. When he walked to the witness box, he seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the gravity of the room. He swore to tell the truth, voice steady but low. He spoke of 2000 as if it were another lifetime. He admitted he had been dishonest with police about the depth of his acquaintance with the victim. They had flirted, he said. They had met privately once. He had been embarrassed. He had feared rumors. He insisted that encounter had been consensual and days before her death. He denied seeing her the night she was killed. He denied any violence. When asked about the gas station footage, he repeated that he had given a co-worker a ride home and simply forgotten until confronted with the video. The prosecution's cross-examination was surgical. Why lie about knowing her well? Why omit the supposed co-worker from initial statements? Why did no one else recall seeing them together in the days leading up to her death? He answered each question, sometimes firmly, sometimes with visible strain. Memory fades, he said. Fear distorts. He had panicked in 2000, afraid of being dragged into something he had nothing to do with. Panic, the prosecutor suggested, often accompanies guilt. As he stepped down from the stand, the jurors avoided eye contact, as jurors are trained to do, but their expressions were unreadable. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited each afternoon for reactions that never came. The victim's family declined to comment. The defendant's relatives issued brief statements of support. The town, once loud with speculation, had grown subdued. People realized that the outcome was no longer dictated by headlines, but by 12 individuals sequestered from the noise. Closing arguments approached like an approaching storm. The prosecution reconstructed the struggle once more, reminding jurors of the victim's defensive wounds, the DNA beneath her nails, the lies about being alone. They argued that while no one had witnessed the fatal moment, the convergence of forensic evidence and shifting statements formed a coherent, compelling narrative. Justice delayed, they said, must not become justice denied. The defense responded by dismantling that coherence piece by piece. They urged the jury to separate emotion from evidence, to recognize the danger of filling gaps with assumptions. They pointed to the shadow in the truck, the anonymous call, the absence of a clear motive. They reminded jurors that reasonable doubt does not require certainty of innocence, only uncertainty of guilt. When the jury finally filed out to deliberate, the courtroom exhaled as one. Snow fell again outside, blanketing the town in a deceptive softness. Inside the jury room, 12 lives intersected over photographs, transcripts, and the weight of a decision that would echo far beyond the courthouse walls. Hours turned into a day. A day stretched into 2. Every creak of the courtroom door sent a ripple through the gallery. Every note passed between bailiff and judge tightened the air. The Minnesota 2000 cold case, that had once seemed solved now hovered in a fragile balance, its fate resting not in science alone, but in interpretation, in belief, in the fragile line between certainty and doubt. And as night settled over the town for the second time since deliberations began, a single question pulsed beneath the quiet. After 25 years of waiting, would the verdict finally close the wound, or tear it open in a way no one had anticipated?